Hi, and welcome to episode 15 of Happy Active. My name's Ellie, and this week we have Nora from Mile After Mile Run Coaching. It's a really interesting conversation about running, long distance running, kind of building up, things that are useful to do if you want to start increasing that exercise. Real one for the running nerds, this one. I really love talking to Nora. I think she's so interesting. And one of the things she was saying is that because she's a data nerd, she's kind of looked at all the stuff. And that's why she got into run coaching, which I absolutely love. It's always fun to talk to someone who's got a real passion and has kind of really dug into all the stats and facts and figures about it in order to make them really good at what they do. And you can tell from this conversation that she really knows her stuff. So if it's on your bucket list to do a marathon or a half marathon, she's definitely someone to check out and get in touch with if you're intimidated by trying to figure out how to do that on your own. So I hope you enjoy listening to this, and as ever, love to hear your thoughts, feelings, feedback, and any suggestions for areas that you'd like us to cover at some point. Enjoy. There are many ways to find your path to better health and happiness, and what works is highly individualized. And my philosophy is that most people are more likely to find that if they're active participants in their own journey. So this is a space to start exploring some of the rich and varied areas in which people practice, so you can start thinking about what resonates with you and discover new or different practices to either start or deepen your own health practices. And today I have Nora from Mile After Mile Run Coaching. So hi, and tell us a bit about what you do.
Hi. Yeah. So as you said, I'm Nora. I'm a certified run coach. I have been a runner for almost 20 years now. I've been running, you know, for a long time. And for a lot of that, I just kind of didn't think of myself as a runner. I just was like someone who ran. And then a few years ago, I kind of got a little more, I don't want to call it serious, but I kind of realized I might have some more potential than I was realizing. And I kind of got down into the science, got into the research about it, and I was like, oh, I've been doing everything wrong for so long. And part of that, then I wanted to learn more, and then I also wanted to help people like not make the same mistakes. And I think it's about realizing your potential, right? We
Yeah.
tell ourselves a lot of lies, right? And I think we don't always realize what we're truly capable of. And so part of that as a run coach and is to get people to realize what they are capable of and walk with them through the process of doing things they never thought it was possible.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because especially with like long distance running, like I think people don't realize how much of it is mental.
Absolutely. And just knowing how to do things like fueling. So that was one of the things I thought I could never run farther than like a half marathon distance, right? I was like, oh, that's it. I would train and then I would just kind of like peter out at 13 miles. Well, that's about when you run out of fuel if you haven't eaten and you haven't fueled your run. So it wasn't that I couldn't do it, I wasn't doing it right. And so I think there's a lot of things like that that we just maybe don't inherently realize. You think, oh, you just pop out and run, easy peasy. But there's a little bit more to it.
Yeah, and I mean, underfueling is something I'm really interested in because it's a really big problem that a lot of, especially women, have. Um, that holds them back in ways they don't realize because of like diet culture and weird ideas they've got from various places about fuel.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm very passionate about that as well. I think there's a lot of research that shows, especially for recreational runners, it's a surprisingly high percentage of runners, both male and female, that consistently underfuel and get to that what's called the low energy availability. So there's actually a study that came out this year. I think they were looking at some Boston Marathon runners, and it was like 40% of the women they spoke to would classify as low energy availability, which is a pretty significant percentage.
Yeah, it's high. And you'd think, like, most people, you'd probably, I guess, from the study, you can see wrongly assume that by the time people have got themselves up to the kind of fitness level to be able to do a marathon, that they would have some better ideas about how to fuel it.
Yeah, I think it's that one, there's a, just knowing how to do it correctly, but two, for a long time, there's been this narrative in running that lighter is better, right? Because there were at some points there were studies that showed, if you were lighter for every pound of body weight, you were X amount faster. Um, that's sort of been disproven over time. Certainly, there's a point at which your body starts to deteriorate. I mean, and that's this next phase after low energy availability is like RED, so relative energy deficiency syndrome, which is really where you get some long-term structural damage. But even just making sure you're eating enough carbs and eating enough, it's a lot. And I think that people kind of have that narrative of, well, I need to be lighter to run faster. And what we're finding out now, a lot of the new research, muscle isn't inherently going to make you slower. In fact, it's going to make you faster and build your endurance. And so your racing weight may actually be heavier than your off-season weight.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. Before we got on, I was just looking at your Instagram, and my husband came in, and he saw you had a thing about strength training being the kind of key, and he said that that was the thing that he hadn't realized when he was marathon training, and that his aim was to do a sub 4, and he didn't get close to that until he started strength training. And he again,
Yeah.
he doesn't look like the shape to be a runner. He's broad. He looks like a football player. Like he's quite a. There's a lot of him. But as soon as he started strength training, the time started coming down.
Yeah, it's such an underrated component. And I think, people are so worried about putting on muscle and putting on weight. But I mean, if you've ever done bodybuilding or you know someone who has, it's not like easy to just all of a
Yeah.
sudden bulk up, right? If it were easy, you wouldn't see people in the gym talking about, getting 200 grams of protein a day and lifting really heavy weights, right? It's hard to put on muscle. And so, I think that unfounded fear of if I lift, I'm going to become too muscular to run effectively, it sometimes is in the back of people's minds. But yeah, strength training, I think, is really a game changer across the board because you can train and do speed work and do every type of running workout you can. But where you really kind of see that shift is including some type of strength training in your portfolio.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, I was trying to explain to someone recently about that, and it's even things like it just helps make all your joints better and supported. So, like, if you're doing good leg strength training, your knees and your ankles are going to cope better if you do, fall or just over those long distances that you're putting them through. By training around it, you're supporting them all better as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, and from an injury rehab standpoint, if you ever, most of us runners have, right? If you've ever been injured, like coming back from an injury isn't just about resting; it's about rebuilding. And to your point, it's about rebuilding the muscles, but also that underlying structure, like tendons, ligaments, joints. In fact, strength training even helps like bone health and bone density long term. So it's part of that bigger picture, right? Because running isn't just about running, it's all of the pieces that go into running, especially when you get into like that real endurance training.
Yeah, and I think we all, well, used to be those kind of myths about, running actually being quite bad for you that used to get kind of thrown around. And probably a lot of that was because people were underfueling and not doing anything except running. And so then it probably can be quite bad for you. But if you're doing all that supportive stuff that's not making your body deteriorate, it's, it's
Yeah.
much easier to do it in a way that isn't long term super damaging.
Oh, definitely. And I think the other part of that too is, when you start running, it takes a lot longer for your joints to adapt than it does for your muscles. Like, so, you'll get in cardiovascular shape, you'll get in kind of muscle endurance shape much faster than your ligaments or your tendons will adjust because of a lot of different factors. I mean, part of that's blood flow and tissue turnover. But I think that's sort of what also perpetuates the myth is, oh, you have someone who's like 6 weeks, 2 months into running, and they're having some joint, I don't want to call it pain, but discomfort. It's just because that adaptation hasn't taken place. And so I think that's just fueled that kind of narrative.
Yeah, and it's funny. So I work with people at literally the opposite end of what you do. So I do a lot of couch to 5Ks with people, but I will often have people do, week 2 or 3, like 4 or 5 times
Yeah.
until that some of that starts to catch up. Because if you've never run before, and just even doing that 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off is pretty tough on all those muscles and joints. And like trying to say to people, it doesn't have to be an 8 week program. Like we can just keep doing this until all of that isn't sore, and then the next one, and we might have to, in each one, as all those things get stronger, we can probably do the next one only 3 times, and then the next one twice.
Hmm.
But you've got to kind of support all these things to catch up. Otherwise you'll get
Yeah,
injured and then you'll be back to being on the couch.
a great way to explain it. Yeah, when I work with newer runners, I it's a much slower progression, right? And time on the feet and doing that walk run interval absolutely is critical, because it's not just like the running piece, it's just getting your joints used to moving, and that impact and all of those changes. And it, to your point, it just takes time.
Yeah, and if you try and go too fast and injure yourself, then it's worse, and trying to get people in that mindset of like slow progress is better because it's progress. Whereas if you try and go too fast and hurt yourself, then you're going
Yeah.
backwards.
And I think that's one of the hardest. If anyone ever asks me like what you need to be a runner, what's the most important thing, we say patience, because it is, right?
Yeah.
Like adaptation, it just takes the time it takes. And that's true when you're starting. That's true when you're trying to get faster. That's true when you're trying to do distance, and all of those things. It just, your body can only adapt at the pace it can adapt from a physiological standpoint. And so it's also the hardest thing, right? We all want to go faster sooner. And so, don't push it, because then you'll set yourself back even more.
Yeah, so I'm a real like a plodder. I'm a very slow runner, but I really enjoy it, and it's really good for my mental health. So that's why I do it. But it's funny because how I started running was through a run club locally, and so they did a couch to 5K program and then a 5 to 10K program, and then they had like you. It was a great running club actually, because you turn up and they had 5 or 6 pace groups, and so you just go out. So I would always go with the 12-minute mile pace group, and just plod around, and then there'd be other people doing much faster, for an hour, but we'd all go off and come back. But there was a guy who joined at the same time as me, and so we did the Catch 5K program together, and then the 5 to 10. And I guess in that first 3 months, his times were coming down every time, consistently every week. Pretty much every week. The watch would give him his PB. And then obviously that stopped happening, because you get to a point where you need to do the extra supportive stuff to see that improvement, and it's going to be slower because your baseline's so much better. And he started finding that very frustrating, because he hadn't realised how much he was enjoying that every week, getting the little thing from the watch being like, this is your fastest mile or your fastest 5K, or and that's
Well,
very
and
tough.
it's true. I think that's one of the things too about being a runner sort of longer term, is that, first of all, most people shouldn't be going out trying to run your fastest, whatever, each time you go out, right? When
Yeah.
you're earlier in your running journey, it's it's a little more nebulous, right? Because every time you go out might be the fastest time just by its nature, even if you're running kind of at an easier pace. Although nothing is truly easy early on, I know. Um, but as you kind of get more seasoned as a runner, going out and running easy, this is another huge mistake that a lot of runners make, is trying to run either at not their maximum pace, but a much, much faster pace than they should be, right? Most of your running should be at that easy, they call it the either zone two, or that's if you're going by heart rate, or like kind of that rate of perceived effort of like 2 or 3, that you can have a conversation during it. Most of people's runs should be there. And then you throw in the spicy speed work for a little extra kick to add on. But yeah, I think that's when I say about patience, right? That mental shift of, it's okay if I'm running slowly, because that's going to actually be the way to affect change long term. and it'll get me to my goals faster. But then you don't get that metric until you run maybe a race, right? And so it's
Yeah.
that, we always say like trust the training. If you're running a marathon and you're training for, at least 4 months for that, you may not see the the fruits of your labor for that long. And it's hard, right? It's hard to get up,
Yeah.
your week 12 of your training plan, and you're supposed to get up at 5 a.m. and run 8 miles with
In the rain
that's a
and the
slog.
dark. Yeah. Yeah, it's really tricky. And I think, so as I said, a super slow runner, so it doesn't really affect me in the same way. And because I do it for mental health reasons, like it just makes my anxiety and sort of stuff better. It's much easier for me to just not worry about. I know I'm never going to be a super fast runner, and that's fine. But I do find it is interesting watching people who are much more competition minded get kind of stuck in those loops. And I think it's quite common because although it should be like individual, it doesn't really feel like it. And I get caught up in it sometimes when I do like 5Ks locally, and as soon as you see someone you accidentally can really easily fall into the like chasing them or like trying to beat whatever.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes one of the things I tell runners a lot is like you're not even just you're not competing with other people unless you're truly, at the kind of top end, right? If you're
Yeah.
either elite or you're an age group qualified, like anything like that. Obviously, that's a little more. You are competing with other people. Um, Sometimes you're not even competing against yourself, right? So if you were a pretty good athlete in your early 20s and you trained well and you were like in a collegiate runner or something. Well, when you're 60, you're probably not going to be hitting those same PBs, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're coming back from injury, or there's like a number of things. And so it's not even like you're always competing against yourself. I like to say you're basically competing to be the best version of yourself on that day. And that may be very different depending on where you are in your life, what kind of time you have to train, right? Like, again, if you're 25 and you're single and you live in an apartment, you have different kind of opportunities to train than if you're, married or with kids, or you have a pretty house and all of the things that take time and effort.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is interesting that, because I remember a friend of ours, and he's done Ironmans before and he wanted to do another one, and they've got, at the time they had 3 young kids, and his wife was like, it's absolutely fine if you're going to do one more before you're like 50 or whatever, but like remember that it's going to be like incredibly selfish, so it's one until the kids are older, like one, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to pick which one it is really carefully, and what you need to train for it really properly, because it's going to take so much time away from our family that you better do your absolute best to
Do it. I like
do it
that.
properly.
Hey, Um, yeah. Well, and that's really true for, and once you get up to like a half, and especially a full marathon distance or anything like a half Ironman or full Ironman, the time commitment is truly a consideration. And I kind of always, tell people, look, I firmly believe that almost everyone can do a half or a full marathon, right?
Yeah.
I think there, with the very few exceptions, right? Everyone has that capacity. It's just, do you want to, and are you able to devote the time and energy that it's going to take? Because it's not insignificant, and that's the most important piece of it. Is, it's just be realistic with yourself, because if you're to your point, right? If you're not going to do it right, then you're either going to end up injured, you're not going to enjoy it, right? Nothing is worse than running a marathon undertrained, like
Yeah.
significantly undertrained. Like that's not enjoyable for people. And so, if you're going to make the commitment, that's great, and you can absolutely do it. Just know that there are a lot of things that you're going to have to do in order to support that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my plan for this year, at the beginning of this year, had been I was going to try and get back up to 10K because I want to do a half marathon next year for the first time. But it became quite apparent. So I've got a 2-year-old, or she's not quite
Mm-hmm.
2 yet. And I'd like pretty significant birth injuries that have made running quite tricky. And I'd kind of thought by January that it would be easier, but basically it's become apparent that I need to, well, I'm now back at physio and going much slower. So that's going to be next year. So my kind of aim for this year is to get back up to maybe consistent 5Ks. But I basically, at the moment, and it is to your point earlier about that slow thing, is that what happens is I get to the point where I can do a minute continual running, but then my leg fitness or my lung fitness isn't as good. So that has to catch up. And then by the time that catches up, the pelvic issues come back up again. And you have to do each bit by bit. And it's taking a lot longer because I guess with pelvic floor injuries, one of the tricky things is, I've got to the point where I can sneeze and it's fine. But as obviously running is such a different stress and it's taking so much longer to build that muscle stamina back. And so it's like, and having, I think in January I was feeling quite frustrated, and then I was like, okay, well, this year we're just going to get back to the 5Ks, and then that's like a good target, but it's not pushing it, because otherwise I'm just going to, by the end of the year, be very disappointed, rather than celebrating the fact that at the beginning of the year it would have been unthinkable to run for a minute without peeing myself, basically.
Well, yeah, it goes back to my point, right? You're competing against, and I use the term competing very loosely, like against where you are today, which is just different.
Yeah.
And that's not bad, right? The fact that you're able to come back and that you're making the good choices to do it slowly and carefully, right? So I think that's the other thing maybe we should celebrate a little more is, people not running when they're injured, or pulling out of races, right? Not starting or not finishing a race because you are injured or it could hurt you worse, or taking more time to get back where you are. Like all of those things, I think we should really celebrate just as much as like I PR'd this race. Making those decisions are actually sometimes a lot harder than going and, running a 5K, because it's that there's a little bit of grieving process, right? Like you're sad. There's that kind of piece of it. And making those choices isn't easy, especially as, especially runners, right? Because we're trained to push hard and not ignore pain signals, but like sometimes a lot of discomfort in running, right? Like there are times where it's hard. And so knowing when to say that, like, I need to pull back, to me is one of the smartest things that you can do as a runner.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because so I had one of the reasons I actually started running was part of ACL rehab. I had an ACL replacement, and I got quite into running in the rehab. I enjoyed it and kind of realised the other benefits it was having. But a key thing for me at the beginning was trying to figure out what was I don't want to say good pain, but like pain that was discomfort that I needed to push through, and what was like a signal from my body that I needed to stop. And like figuring out the difference between those can be quite difficult, but it's quite important for that reason, that actually if you push the wrong kind, you can do quite long-term damage.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the hardest things to figure out, and most important things to figure out as a runner is I like to term it like what's pain and what's discomfort, right? So, and it takes a long time to realize that. I think once you're running for a while and you've had some true injuries and just like really hard times, you get sometimes a sense of, okay, this is a big deal and this isn't. But there is a learning curve, right? And I always do want people to err on the side of caution for sure. Absolutely. And if you're uncertain, go see a medical professional who specializes in sports or running, right? That is a key. I know that this is a sidebar, but I'm a big advocate of if you are a runner and you think you're injured, finding someone who works with runners is really important, because those metrics are a little bit different from the general population than if you're an athlete. So box aside here, that's a big recommendation of mine. But there are times where, like, we talked about, it takes a while for your joints to get used to running. And so they're going to be maybe not painful, but, not quite awesome. And so knowing kind of what is, oh no, I'm having like an issue with runner's knee, or my ligaments in my knee just aren't adapted to where I am yet.
Yeah, and
And there's
sometimes I
no,
find like the first 5, 10 minutes, my knee is a bit grumpy, but it's often scar tissue moving about. And
Mhm.
then if it doesn't settle down after the first 5 minutes, basically, then it's something to notice. But if after 5 minutes it goes away, that was just all the scar tissue getting in the right place for.
Yeah, and honestly, even more than injury, I think that if you're doing a hard workout as a runner, there may be days where you need to call it back or dial it back. Maybe it's really hot out. Maybe you haven't slept well. Like there's a whole host of
Mm-hmm.
reasons that, you know, it just may not be your day. And they may have nothing to do with anything you've done. It could be a lot of different factors. And again, being willing to kind of pull back and recognize that is one of the skill sets to develop as a runner as you move along is recognizing what's just like I don't wanna versus okay, like this is I'm making a decision based on kind of the parameters of the weather or my health or whatever because I'm making a decision to pull back because I think it's the right one, right? So there's kind of a nuance there, and it's not always clear, right? Sometimes it might just be that, and you know what? Sometimes if you really don't want to, maybe there's something else going on, right? And maybe you just need a break.
Yeah. So it's actually funny. I feel like this is a superpower of the pelvic floor injury that is quite funny, but it's very TMI for some people. But anyway, is one of the ways I can often tell if it's a day to pull back is that my pelvic floor like very quickly immediately it's like nope. And that'll offer me because I've not had enough sleep, where previously I might have pushed through, but that muscle does not lie. It's just like we're too tired to do this engaging properly. It's like a very
Well, I mean,
fast lesson.
yeah, you joke, but like honestly, it's kind of nice to have a real barometer, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you know your body well enough to know
Yeah.
what like when it just isn't the day, and you're okay with that. And like honestly, that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, no, it's funny because that issue has actually really helped me realize how important sleep is, because other day I can feel completely fine in all other ways, but obviously because we've got a young child, there are just sometimes where you don't get much sleep. But I some of those days, my watch will tell me I've only had 4 or 5 hours sleep, and I'll feel kind of fine given that. But actually, as soon as you start that signal that you're not fine, or as fine as you're being able to push through, is quite helpful, because I think those are the kind of days where it's tempting to push through because you feel like, oh well, I'm fine. I do 4 hours sleep every now and again
Yeah.
and manage.
Yeah, no, so I'm glad you brought up sleep. To me, I think there are a couple of main pillars of that are essential to ever being successful at running. And successful, I just mean healthy, sustained, and meeting your goals, whatever those may be. So that doesn't have to be, qualifying for Boston. That can just be running regularly. But sleep and recovery is really crucial because lack of sleep, even aside from just recovery of your muscles and all of the other general health benefits, you can do stuff like raise your heart rate. So if you haven't been sleeping well, you might have a higher heart rate during your runs, which increases your rate of perceived effort, and there's a whole host of things. But especially as you go up in distance, I think one of the other mistakes people tend to make is sometimes you need more sleep, right? If you're normally a 7 hour a night person in general and you kind of function okay on that, if you're training for a marathon, you might need 8 hours because your body is doing extra recovery, it's doing extra repair. And so if you're not sleeping enough, there's only so much stress your body can take. And running is about, introducing stressors. And I don't mean stressors in a bad sense, but introducing stressors and then recovering. And that's how adaptation occurs. So if you're adding all of these stressors in and you're not able to do adequate recovery, which is where the food, the nutrition, sleep, all of that comes in, well, then you're not adapting. You're just continually stressing your body until it gets to the point where it can't take anymore. And that's where you really start to have major problems, whether they be injury or health impacts.
Yeah, and I remember quite recently actually I was listening to something, but they were saying basically these like Hollywood people who have to train for like Marvel movies or whatever to get those kind of Hollywood body type things. Apparently, when they get offered those roles and they speak to the trainer, the first thing the trainer says is, "Can you get between 10 and 12 hours of sleep in each 24-hour period? Because if you can't do that, nothing that I can do is going to help you get to that, the kind of body you need to be a Marvel superhero." But it is interesting that like that's the first question if you really want to, and obviously in that case it's like a more of a bodybuilding type thing, but kind of that kind of fitness you just can't get without sleep.
Right. And that's actually when I was talking about, when you're thinking about training for a longer endurance event, making sure you have time to be able to devote to it. That's something too, right? People think, oh, it's just about the number of hours you're running for, and I'm going to use a marathon because I think it's probably one of the best examples, right? It's not just the number of hours you're running per week. It's also you have to sleep more. So can you get 8 to 9 hours of sleep? Sometimes more. Like there might be days where you need more. Do you have time to eat as much, right? Like honestly, when I'm training for a marathon, there are days I feel like I'm constantly eating because you have like there's only so many calories that you can take in at any given time. So you're constantly eating. You need to make sure you're planning enough to eat the food. And so I know it sounds like I'm discouraging people from running marathons. I love it. I love training for a marathon. Marathons are fantastic and great, but I do think it's important that people recognize in order to do that in a healthy and again to make it fun, there's a commitment to do all of the things to ensure that you're staying healthy.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that people know what they're getting into, right? Because then they're going to be more likely to be successful at it. And I guess marathons are one of those things that are on a lot of people's bucket list, even if it's just to do it once. And so, but I think because of that, people talk about it like a thing of, you just have to make the time to do the running without really thinking about all of those other things that you've got to build in.
Yeah. And again, one of the reasons I did become a run coach was because a lot of the stuff I learned the hard way. I don't want people to have to do that, right? Like there's a better way. You can have someone help walk you through that. Like you don't have to figure out everything on your own as a runner, if this is your first marathon or even if you're trying to get faster, right? There's so much information out there, and I'm a data geek, and so I'm like, I read all the books, I read all the articles. Like I'm that person. Like I'm a scientist by background. So like this has been really fun, but it's a lot. And so if you do want to run a marathon or even a half, right, that's still got its pieces. It's like a puzzle to put all of the components together. Like you don't have to do it by yourself. You can have someone who has that expertise to help you.
Yeah, and I think because it's one of those things that if you Google it, you get quite quickly super conflicting information. It feels very overwhelming, and actually having someone who knows and be like, oh, well, that's the reason these are conflicting is because it's two different body types, or that's why someone who's got this background would do that program and someone who's got this body type or this background would do that program, so that's why you're getting those two. But for you, there's a third one that would actually be even better or whatever it is.
And honestly, this is my favorite part about one of my favorite parts. I say that about everything. My favorite part, it's about being a coach, is like putting the pieces together for each person, right? Because it's not cookie cutter. It is a puzzle, and it's the 75% science and then 25%. Okay, let's figure it out based on all of the information we have and figure out what works for you. And it's not just, your capacity or where you're starting from or your time. It's like your lifestyle. What do you have available to you, and how often can you run? Like it's all of those pieces. And so kind of putting all of those things together to figure out what's going to get that person to where they want to go. It's really fun. It's such an enjoyable.
Yeah, actually another thing my husband said about his training when he was marathon training is that obviously like the conventional wisdom is do your long run on a Sunday. And he hated that. And what he realised is that if he did it Saturday morning, it wasn't hanging over him the whole weekend. So, it was a great start to the weekend. And then it meant like if he had a party to go to or something to do on Saturday night, go to the pub with his friends, he could still do that without thinking, oh, but I've got to get up super early to do a 20-mile run in the morning. and I can still have a few beers, and and so, and he said as soon as he switched that to it being a Saturday morning thing, not a Sunday thing, it like flew because it suited his lifestyle way better. But every plan he'd looked at has that log on a Sunday.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I mean, there's a whole slew of things. I think that because, most plans are, if you're looking at a static plan, it's just kind of lowest common denominator, kind of broad spectrum. Sometimes actually people do better on a 10-day plan. Now, most of us do week long just because our lives are built like that. But, especially if maybe your job is a little unconventional, I like a lot of nursing folks have kind of like that, kind of 3 days on, 3 days off. So you might build it over 10 days. Or, there's kind of all these different wild card things that I think are really interesting, and can drive whether you're going to be successful, right? Because that's the point, is what is something that's going to make you successful and that you're going to be able to do. Because you could pick the best marathon plan ever, or I could write you the best marathon plan ever. If it doesn't work with your lifestyle, you're not going to do it, or you're not going to be able to do it. Then,
Yeah. It's funny because that's what I think sometimes when people start working with me and they get a bit frustrated when I won't just give them a meal plan if it's nutrition I'm doing with them. But that's, I mean, exactly the same reason. Like, there's no point in me giving people a meal plan if I don't know what foods they like, how they cook. People's idea of what cooking is very different. You can give people a meal plan if they want, but if you don't eat fish, 50% of what's already there is just out. Like, I need to know people, and it's much better to say, here's a resource of 50 recipes that all do the same thing. You pick the things you like and know you can cook. Or some people like batch cooking, some people want to cook every night. I can't just say, all right, day one, here's a meal plan.
Yeah. Well, and you learn over time, right? Like, people might change, or things switch, or they might find something that they didn't know they liked.
Yeah, or they like it and their husband hates it, or their kids don't like it, and then it becomes too complicated because you're like a short order chef making like 6 meals a night.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Well, I've actually got a friend at the moment he's kind of amazing. So he has done a lot of marathons, and I don't think he'd mind me saying this. He doesn't look like a traditional marathon runner. He looks like a rugby player. And he's now training for an ultra marathon. His kind of aim for this year, he'd done a few longer ultras, but like the 30-mile type ultras. And I think he's moving towards doing this. It's a Scottish race, and it's the Highland race. It's coast to coast in Scotland. So it's about 100 miles, and it's hilly.
Yeah.
And he'd never done hill stuff, and he's been documenting learning that. And it made me think of it because one of the things you said earlier about having to slow down, that he has documented quite a lot how much he's been struggling with that mentality. And even though he can see it's working, that sometimes he still finds it really counterintuitive to do really slow runs because he's been so used to years for like push or intervals or...
Oh yeah, especially for ultra marathons, like you're that's a long haul. You absolutely cannot run fast, and a lot of times you're fueling with something more real food, because you can have a little more ability to digest it than you would for a slightly faster race. So it's ultras are such a different animal than almost any other. But yeah, it's a lot of it is the psychological struggle to do things. It's the psychological struggle to run slower, and sometimes it's the psychological struggle to really push yourself, like on a hard tempo or a hard interval workout. So,
yeah. Hills are what really frighten me. I'm so bad at hills.
Well, you live in Florida, so I'm sure you don't have a lot of exposure.
None. That's great. I can sign up for any race within 100 miles of me, safe in the knowledge there will be no hills.
So actually, hills are interesting. So it's really, they're both a blessing and a curse, right? Like, so hill work can be such I don't want to say easy, but a quick, efficient, and effective way to add sort of strength and speed to your training protocols, right? So that's like one of the first things you can add into a training plan to get people kind of really pushing a little bit harder than they would. But if your whole course is hills, then it adds a little bit of a different element, and it's not just going up. So this is the other thing. You see a lot of times people who want to like try to Boston qualify, do some of these like massive downhill races, and that actually, if you don't train for it, like your quads are gonna burn out real quick because that's a totally different mechanism and physiology, like when you're going downhill. So uh, kind of he was talking about like his course is going to be really hilly. One of the things that's really important is to train on similar type, terrain as your race is going to be. So if you live in Florida and you're going to run something that's got a decent number of hills, like you got to find yourself a parking garage, you got to find yourself an overpass, to make sure that you're getting not just the uphill, but the downhill too.
Yeah, downhill is. I do a lot of hiking, and that's my like big love, and like mountain hiking. And it is always funny how much it takes you off guard, how much harder it is on your legs to come down than up, even though it's much quicker. That's what makes your legs burn out. It's those big steep downs.
Yeah, and I don't think people think about that. And yeah, hiking is a really good example of that. If you're not used to hiking, you don't realize that when you're running. And so anytime you're training on hills, it's both training for uphill and training for downhill, which I think a lot of people don't ever think about.
Yeah, I find it's just so where we used to live in England was really hilly, so all of our runs had some hills, and then there were a couple of really, notorious steep hills near us that they would take us to sometimes just to. But I find it like the stress it puts on my lungs going uphill. I've never quite cracked how to stop that. And it'd be even when I was able to run 10k without walking, you put a hill in, I'd have to walk up half of it. So bad.
I mean, I think that's just another practice, practice, practice. And at some point, you're at some point everyone reaches a plateau or even a physical limitation, right? Like there's only so much that anyone can get to. And so that could be different and that is different for everyone, right? Like I'm never gonna be as fast as, Kipchoge, unfortunately. So it just, there may be things that, some people are better at shorter distances. Some people are better at longer distances. Some people do better on hills. Some people, do better on, like rolling terrain. Like there's kind of all of these different parameters. And that's, I think goes back to like, there's no single answer for everyone.
No, and it is interesting. Like, I think sometimes what I notice about people who do a lot of long distance running and kind of, multiple marathons, it is always interesting because that's often the way they'll challenge themselves is by picking different terrains or different, just to get that challenge, especially if they're not into doing ultras, which seems to be the route people take.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it is interesting. One of the things, so as I mentioned, I love training for marathons. I do. One of the things that I think, sometimes if people who are like really into marathons always forget about shorter distances, which are a different level of challenge. I ran a 5K last year after my marathon, and I was like, oh my God, this is even worse. This is so much harder than running a marathon, right? And so I think sometimes we think bigger, 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 but there's also kind of other ways to challenge, like a 5K, a 10K, even doing miles, like see if what's your fastest mile. So I like to kind of remind people that, yeah, marathons are great. That's a great distance. It's fantastic. But you can get a challenge a different way if you're doing shorter races, because we're not used to it.
Yeah, actually, that run club that I was mentioning that I was in England, what the great thing about what they did, they would do, yes, they had those 2 meetups a week where people do those just for an hour, and they had a marathon group for the weekends as well. But they also once a quarter would do what they called Golden Mile, but it was on a racetrack, fastest mile flat, and it was really helpful for progression because you would, like you say, it can be hard to notice that you're getting better when you're doing the consistent training, but every 3 months just going and getting a marker of like what's my flat out fastest mile was really helpful for people, especially when people are doing that long slow training where it can feel like you're just treading water, but actually you are getting consistently fitter.
Oh, that's a really cool idea. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that. A lot of places have like the park runs, right? So you can just go and run a 5K anytime.
I know. That's what I miss the most about the UK.
There are some around.
There's one in Florida, but it's like 45 minutes from me. Like in the UK,
Yeah,
you're probably never more than 15 minutes away from one.
yeah.
So like
I
wherever you
think
go,
it's
you would go to weddings and everyone would go in the morning. And like,
Yeah, it's I think it's becoming more popular here.
yeah,
I've seen more and more of them pop up, but that's, a nice kind of way to do that regularly, have those check-ins and even have fun, right? I think the other thing that happens, especially I know I'm talking a lot about marathons, but when you're
I
training for
know.
a half or a full, like that's only one or two races a year. Maybe, I mean, some people do more, but generally like
Yeah,
two marathon blocks. Whereas for a 5K, you can do that almost as much as you want, right? Like if you're well trained. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of race more, or maybe you would just want to run for fun. It's a lot harder to do for a longer race because it takes so much more commitment. But if you just want to kind of go out and hang out with people rather than race, yeah,
yeah,
there's
and
a
that's
lot
what
of
I love about parkrun because it's so community minded and like in fact, a lot of people when they were doing longer training would come and do the parkrun
yeah.
either as their warm up or their warm down as part of their longer weekend run anyway. But it meant there was a whole lot of community, and like the local parkrun that I was involved in back home before we moved here would do once about every 6 months. We'd do the run club would provide paces, and so I would always pace the like 40-minute group. So that was like a walk jog group, and it was great because so I'd have the big 40 on my back. So then anyone who wanted to try and get a 40-minute, and it's really fun because it meant that like loads of people who previously that might be the first time they'd continually run a 5K, and then they'd know that if they stuck with me, they were going to get their PB definitely. And it's quite a fun way of doing it, but it's such a good community
Yeah.
that you have all of that, and there's no judgment for the people who just would come every week and walk the whole thing, or the people who would do the one that I went. It was on a track, so it was quite good. It was pretty much 2 laps of like a racetrack, so it was all paved. So a lot of people would come, what they called tourists, so not to their home one, to PB because it was a fast place to do it. And so you'd have everything from quite a lot of people who were doing like 16 minutes right up to like an hour. So it's a really nice one because like the one local to me, there's very few slower people. It's mostly pretty, not elite, but good runners. And so when you're slower, you kind of feel like you're holding everyone up from leaving.
Yeah, and one of the things that you were talking about with like the community about a park run, and I want to also make sure that people, you don't have to race, right? Like some people think that if you are going to run, it's about racing, but it's not. It's also about, like you said, either mental health, it's about enjoying it, it's about fitness, it's about just doing something you like, and getting out there and doing something for yourself. And you don't have to race, or you can do something like a park run, which is much more about community rather than about time. And I think that sometimes people may not, think about getting to running, or they might be a little intimidated because of like the whole racing thing. And you don't have to. You can be a runner, you can be a fantastic runner and never run a race, because running's just about a lot of other things as well. So I did want
Yeah,
to
and I actually think
put that
there are
out
some
there.
really nice 5Ks around where I am, and I think they're quite common. But like, so there's like a turkey trot, which I think a lot of the turkey
Yeah.
trot type ones are similar, where it's much more about the vibe of the day. And so there are people who are trying to do them really fast, but there's also a lot of walkers and a lot of families coming out to just do it together on Thanksgiving. But actually, where I live, there's quite a lot of ones similar to that through the year, and they're really nice because I can enter them. Last year I entered a couple where I knew I probably wasn't ready to run that far, but it gave me something to aim towards with training. But I also knew they were uncompetitive enough that if on the day it turned out I wasn't really able to run, I could walk it and it wouldn't be a problem, or I could walk jog the whole thing. But it gave me those things in to train towards, which I quite like. I need that a bit. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's always, oh, next week I'll start again.
Yeah, I think a lot of the local 5Ks are really nice like that. Or even there are some even 10Ks. I like sometimes when I'm training, there's a couple races around here. Well, I will kind of like end up in the middle of them because they're like on the trail, and I was like, well, I'm in a just kind of hang out with you guys now running this race. But yeah, they're much lower key than what we traditionally think of as a true like race, where they close everything off and it's just a lot of that. So I think if people are looking for something a little more accessible or less pressure, there are these local races that are very welcoming. And to your point, they're not even about racing necessarily so much as about having a goal and having some support while you're trying to maybe hit a distance you've never done before.
Yeah, or a time, because that's what I liked about parkrun, and I like about parkrun is that you do get like an official time every week, so it can
Mhm.
give you like a good barometer of where you are, but it's not, it doesn't feel super racy. I was doing them a bit, but they've moved where they do the one near to me, so it's a bit harder. But it's like the US road running group, and they're not in every state yet, but they're great because the same thing. It's very low key, so it's not quite parkrun because you do have to pay, but you do get a medal. But the ones local to me had every weekend, or every, I think it's every third weekend, but it's a 5K, a 10K, and a half marathon. And so what's great about that is it's just on my local. It was on my local running trail, so they didn't have to shut any roads off. There was probably only like 30 or 40 people doing it, so it's not like a huge race vibe, but it's properly timed. So you get like a chip time, which is helpful if you're training, and you're doing it with some other people, which if you like that is helpful. And you get the kind of medal, so it kind of makes you, but it's quite cheap. Once you join, they were like $10 or $15 to enter, so it's not a huge financial commitment. Some of these other races can be quite a lot. But what I liked about that is it's a bit of community, and again, it's like, well, I've booked in to do it now, so I've got to get up on Saturday morning at 7 a.m. to do it now because I've said I will. And you get that proper time, so you can again start seeing your progress, but it doesn't feel like hugely pressured, like, oh, I've spent $100 on this marathon and I've got to book in travel because
Mhm.
it's hard to get there, or you need to stay in a hotel, or all these other things. And there were quite a lot of the half marathoners who I think were training for marathons, but having a half marathon booked in every 3 weeks to do,
Yeah.
with other people, it's quite nice.
Yeah, that's
It's
that's
like
a
a
great
training hack.
option. Yeah, it's a great option for people to kind of, again, like you said, to have opportunities to run and race without kind of the level of commitment or the level of um, fanfare, right? Sometimes it's just nice to go out and kind of run your hardest without 30 million people along the streets or
And
running
it
with a
also,
lot
I
of
think
other
it
runners.
gets you that, because you still always, even in those smaller ones, go off too fast. So it
Yeah.
helps you learn that self-discipline at the beginning.
Yeah. No, I like that. That's a really good idea. Yeah. Because that is, I think, a huge mistake people make a lot is like, oh, race day, out like a flash. Yeah, pacing
And
is
how do you
it,
help people with that? Because that's really hard on the race day.
it is. I mean, it's one of those conversations. You reiterated it time and time again. Don't go out too fast. We know what your pace is supposed to be. Like, don't um, don't get caught up in the. You're gonna feel great, especially like America. Like, yeah, you're gonna feel great.
The
You've been
adrenaline.
tapering. This is like, it's gonna be fantastic, and you're gonna think you're gonna be able to do this much faster than when you get to mile 24. In which case, you are going to not think that you can do it that fast. So, um, there's a couple of strategies. One, really pay attention to your pace on your watch.
Hmm.
Mile one, it might not be like if you're like 2 minutes under your race pace, like there's a problem and you need to slow down. Um,
Hmm.
Sometimes there's natural because the beginning of a race is so crowded. Sometimes there is a natural little bit of you are automatically slowed. There some people like to run with pace groups, like you were talking about pace groups. Um, some people don't like that. If if someone's not really good at pacing themselves, a pace group is really maybe a good tool, at least for the first, 2 to 3 miles. So you're not going out fast. Or I've told people to use them as a barometer, right? So
Hmm.
look, if you're aiming for a 9 minute mile and all of a sudden, like you're up on the 8:30 pace group, you probably overshot it a bit. And so just think about that dialing back. So actually using them just kind of, even if you don't want to run with one, using them as a kind of guardrails to flag like where you are pace wise is actually pretty
Yeah.
useful in some of those races. But it's really a learning curve, right? Sometimes you just don't know until you do it, and then um,
Yeah. And like you
that's just
say, in a 5K, it's a bit easier to correct it. It's quite
yes,
hard in a marathon because it's so long. And like you said, then you're much more likely to just completely
yeah,
burn out at mile 23 or whatever.
yeah, and
Especially on your
that's
first marathon, I hadn't realised until in fact, I think it was probably talking to my husband recently, because he did all his marathons before we were together, that, when you do your first marathon, if you've done a lot of training programs, you might never have actually run that distance before you started tapering.
I would say most, unless you're a seasoned marathoner, I would never have someone run that full distance. You don't need to.
Yeah.
And the potential for injury does increase when you're really, especially for someone who's this is their first marathon, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
just not used to running that level of mileage. And so there's no need to do that. It is daunting, right? I think that everyone has that thought of like, you have a 16-mile run, and you're like, how am I going to run 10 more miles? Like, it's impossible. It's impossible. Like, everyone has that thought at some point in their marathon training. But the way that you, like, the whole point about training is about cumulative fatigue, cumulative miles, stacking running, stacking all of that stuff so that when you're running a 20-mile run, you're running on tired legs. I like to do kind of sometimes do back to back, like a little bit harder run one day, the next day you'll do your longer run. So you're running on these tired legs, which simulates like what you'd feel like later in a race. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is. I guarantee almost every single person who's ever been training for a marathon has that moment of like, oh no, this is, I don't understand how this is going to happen. But that's when you gotta go back to trust the training because it's built that way on that kind of amassing of all of that over the weeks and weeks. Like you've been putting in all this time and effort. It's there. You know, you can do this. Just make sure that you're following the plan. Don't try to throw in. See people like the last 2 weeks of marathon, like when you're tapering, I'll just throw in an extra like couple. No, no, no. Like that's not that's not going to work. So it's really an interesting kind of progression during a marathon training. And honestly, having run multiple marathons, I still have that moment sometimes where how am I going to do this?
Yeah, it does feel counterintuitive, but I guess, yeah, it's the having the fresh legs is what's important because, like you say, for those long distances, the sleep and the not being on tired legs is
Mhm.
the key, or it can be.
It can be, yeah, it definitely is. It's just it's the total sum total, right? It's not. I always tell people like if they're like I missed a run, do I need to redo it, or I missed this? Like it is not any single run and no single run that you do any time in your training for any of your races. So I'm talking 5K to marathon and beyond. Like there is no single run that is going to make or break your training. So if you miss something, it's okay. Like if you
Yeah.
miss a week, it's okay. Um, because life happens, right? Like we all get sick. We all have things that pop up.
Yeah.
Um, and there's no, it's the sum total. And so I really kind of people can get really in the weeds and freak out if they miss time. Um, if you're working with a coach, we can kind of work around that and figure out how to either kind of replace that or just to skip it, right? So there's kind of different parameters, but um, I always I always hear a lot of like, oh my God, I missed this run. Do I make it up? And the answer is almost always no.
Yeah, and I think, and that is actually, it's probably pretty good life advice as well. It's like the long cumulative, like
Yeah.
slow sustainable changes that can handle the odds, missed routine or this bit of a bad day, because if you've done that, if you're doing that long-term training,
Hmm.
the whole point is you're increasing all of your strength and fitness cumulatively so it can handle missing it.
Yeah. And I think people, it's a really great light advice. And I think looking at kind of all of the studies about it, you don't lose fitness as quickly as people feel like you do, right? So everyone is like, oh my God, I missed a week or I missed whatever, and I feel like I haven't run in 12 years, and I can't run at all. And I think that it's if you look at the actual data, the amount of fitness you lose is much lower than everyone thinks, even over 2 weeks, even over 4 weeks, right? Like there's
Yeah, and if you've got that base, it comes back much quicker.
it
That's the
does,
thing. Like it
yeah,
might feel the first 10k back might feel awful, but the second one will probably be all right because it
yeah.
is going to come back much quicker.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to remind people who are either coming back to running or returning from injury is it's actually much faster to get back in shape than it went the first time, right? Because there's
Yeah,
all
when we
sorts
go
of
back to running, there's a local run club to us, and every time we've been, it irritates me so much with my husband, where I can be objectively fitter, like working my fitness much more. But I think because of having done that marathon and the big long training, that he can always do a sub 35k, even off basically nothing. I mean, obviously his legs already hurt the next day, but he just has that in his legs because, I think he'd have to be really seriously injured to not be able to do that. And it irritates me so much because I'll have been training so hard and like working really hard to like improve, and he could just, it's like
yeah,
there because he's got that core
yeah.
thing in his legs now.
Yeah, we always talk about lifetime miles, right? And so that's when we were talking about, oh, if you have to miss a race season, or people are like, oh, I've wasted my training because I had to pull out of a race or something. Well, you didn't waste it. That's all banked for the future, right? Like your everything you do, whether it be running or even, we were talking about strength training, all of that fitness work, proper nutrition, like it's all building for the future. And so you're kind of banking that for long term and, in bigger picture for longevity, right? So everything you do now is going to help you, not just performance wise, but like life wise.
Yeah, and I think that's, yeah, it's really important for people to remember, because I think that you can lose sight, especially when you've got these like quite strict plans. It can be quite easy to like lose sight of that bigger picture.
Yeah, it is.
um yeah,
And
thank you so much.
and
This has been like super interesting, and since I did say, and I think it is true, that it's like on a lot of people's bucket lists to either do a half or a full marathon. What if people want to work with you, where can they come? But also, what's some like advice for getting started?
Sure. Well, so obviously, if you want to work with me, so I'm on Instagram at mile_after_mile. You can also email me directly at nora@mileaftermile.co. That's
Mm-hmm.
CO. Um, and so general advice, as I said, your biggest friend here is patience. Um, Always work with a plan, whether that be a static one or with your coach, because there's a way to build to a half or full marathon, and it is really important that you do it in a way that is not going to get you injured. Right? You have to build slowly. You have to make sure that you're doing you're building and then you're deloading. So
Mm-hmm.
never just wing it unless you absolutely know what you're doing. That's really key. And then the just like we've talked about here, recovery, which includes sleep, nutrition, strength training, and mobility. It's all part and parcel of getting you to the end, but also making the sustainable, keeping yourself injury free. And most importantly, enjoy it, right? There will be times where it is miserable. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And so don't get so caught up in it that you don't recognize how much fun it is and that it is really an accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah, easy to lose sight of the fun when it gets getting closer to race day and you're not quite feeling fit enough.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's when we were talking about, sometimes you get so caught up in the plan and like this day to day, because sometimes it's hard to get up and run.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing why you do it because it's enjoyable. Every once in a while, if someone gets really burned out, I'll tell like one of my athletes, I'll tell them like, just go out and run for fun. I'm not going to tell you what to do. go have fun. It can be 3 miles, it can be 1 mile, it can be 10 miles. Like
Yeah.
perfect spring day,
What?
go and enjoy
Take
it.
your watch off. Don't try and
Yep.
like do any pay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really hard. I'm really bad at that, but I try and do like at least one run a week without um looking at the tracking at all, and just do it for fun somewhere pretty.
Yeah. It is definitely hard to do. So,
Yeah.
but it is important, right? Because like I said, we run for a lot of reasons, and even those of us that race or trying to hit time goals, inherently, it's supposed to be enjoyable. So we should make sure it
Yeah.
is.
Thank you very much. It's been really
Yeah.
great.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun. I appreciate it.